Judge Holden in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is one of the most memorable and dynamic characters ever created in the history of literature. So much so, there are a ton of Cormac McCarthy fans out there who are seduced by Holden's philosophy and view it as an accurate perception of reality. But what if Cormac McCarthy created Judge Holden to show scientific materialism's fallibility and how it malignantly affects human nature? Because when you go and read the early drafts of Blood Meridian in the Cormac McCarthy archive, Judge Holden has a very small presence, and it's not a very supernatural one. And as I talked about in my video on how Cormac McCarthy writes his novels and how he drafts and revises, in the later stages of revisions is when he starts to add these supernatural elements and characters. This is most apparent with Judge Holden in Blood Meridian, the Triune in Outer Dark, and Werecats in The Orchard Keeper. These were all added in the later revision phases. And so in this video, we're going to explore this symbol of scientific materialism that McCarthy is presenting to us and seeing if Judge Holden is a rambling seducer or a prophet. I'll have quotes from Holden and other scholars, but I first got introduced to this idea last year when Dr. Patrick O'Connor came on my show, and he is a professor of philosophy and really a genius about Cormac McCarthy. He has a book on him. The link is down in the description below, but here's a quote from Connor on this very idea. Quote, Holden clearly represents what Nietzsche designates as the nihilism of scientific materialism. For Nietzsche, nihilism denotes very vulgar forms of positivism and materialism, which reject the historical and spiritual dimension of humanity in favor of a crudely materialistic view of life. Holden, as I will argue, elevates this materialistic view of life to its absolute apogee. And so what scientific materialism means is just an elevated materialism. And materialism is a philosophy that believes nothing exists outside your own consciousness. And the weaponization of materialism through science or in reality with guys like Judge Holden could be called scientific materialism. So now I want to reach out to you guys to comment down below and tell me, why did Cormac create such a potent symbol of materialism? And I think there are only three different options. Number one being, did Cormac use scientific materialism as a literary means of just creating vicious and memorable characters? Characters like Holden, Anton Chigurh, and Lester Ballard don't work with massive streaks of compassion. Number two, did Cormac use these characters to attack the position? Or number three, did Cormac believe this is how reality functioned and was writing his truth? And one could make a very good argument for either of these, but your answer to this question will inform our original question. Should we take Judge Holden seriously, or is he just a rambler? And so when we look at the first idea, did McCarthy just see that pure violence, that this crazy scientific materialism was great for literature, and it was just something that he was interested in even before he got super into science? Because when we look at Kenneth Ratner in The Orchard Keeper, the Triune in Outer Dark, Lester Ballard in Child of God, Judge Holden, antagonist in the Border trilogy, Anton Chigurh, Black in The Sunset Limited, the Cannibals in the Road, a lot of the characters in The Counselor, all of them are embodiments of scientific materialism. And maybe I'm going too far with this term because people are violent. People have always been vicious and had no soul, didn't really feel like anything existed outside of their reality because they were psychopaths. But with Cormac, it's never as simple as you think. People are like, it's not that deep, man. You just, read the text. It's just, yeah. No, if you look at how deep he layered his stories and just spent years upon years revising, you see the evolution of his works and how he was being influenced by other authors and putting contrast in there and palindromes like in Blood Meridian. You're like, okay, there is a infinite amount of meaning in here that can be extracted if we want to. And something that happened while McCarthy was writing Blood Meridian was he was going through his personal renaissance. In 1974, when he leaves his second wife, Annie Delisle, moves to Tucson, Arizona for a year or two, he starts to get into the occult and science and having a sexual revolution by being able to get with other women outside of kind of the incestuous zone in terms of Knoxville's culture. And all of this created this major renaissance in his mind. And while studying the occult in the history of the West, one of the main topics he was focused on was science. Which brings us to an interesting point about Judge Holden. When you look at the other list of characters like Anton Chigurh or the Triune, they're not scientific characters. But Judge Holden is a geologist. He is a man of science. He is a man of an analytical philosophy in terms of the study of the earth and the elements of reality. And during the later revisions of Blood Meridian, McCarthy had received his MacArthur Fellowship and was starting to hang out with these scientists. And if you guys have ever met kind of the upper echelon of the scientific, mathematic, or honestly any community, when you go to the top level, like with most people, they have such a singular focus that a lot of the times they kind of appear autistic or have a lot trouble communicating or are kind of weird or they feel like everybody's using them, so they develop kind of these malignant personality traits, and they're just kind of in general kind of off and weird. And maybe that's just my projections as just a normal everyday dude, but I feel like it's pretty well known that's how these people act. And number two is my personal opinion, because I don't think that he believed that this is how reality was functioning, because he wouldn't add the compassion in the Border trilogy I talked about in yesterday's video, or even in The Road and a lot of his novels, if he really believed that the world was just this dark place. And even better, he purposefully creates characters existing in this scientific materialism, or what I like to call hyper rationality, and they aren't happy characters. When you're looking at Judge Holden talking, during the fireside, booming talk, or like when he's giving disquisitions to others, most of the time, no one is really listening to him, you guys. He's not being taken very seriously. We project onto the story that it's this epic moment in time. But do you think Joel Glanton's sitting there and being like, yeah, man, yeah? Or is he just kind of listening? Sometimes there's that dude, man, that's kind of like me, maybe right now, who's just sitting there and he's talking and like rambling, and maybe they're like nodding their heads like, yeah, man, that's cool. But are they actually taking him seriously? Are they taking him as seriously as a lot of the lit bros who, when they see this, it kind of reaffirms their reality, which means that they can just continue to not transform and just, be kind of womanizers and weirdos. And I feel like a lot of the time, the drive to like Holden and the drive toward this philosophy is from people who have never confronted their own shadow, who have never gone out and individuated, especially in the negative zone. These people struggle with vertical thinking, vertical feeling, I should say. They look around reality horizontally. They look across the street. They look at what others are doing. They are existing in present times in terms of politics and ideas and engaging in arguments with people on Reddit and these types of things, but they're not looking to the underworld or the upper world in terms of energetic, ecstatic, or depressive states, like seeking those things out. And we know that Cormac was into this. The book that Cormac would tell people to read, Cormac would rave about William James's 1902 book, The Varieties of Religious Experiences. Even to the 90s, he was telling people, you have to read this book. He was shoving it in people's faces. And we do know that Cormac McCarthy did experiments with psychedelics and did have his own, with studying the occult and Gnosticism and all these other things. And in his 2008 interview with Oprah, he said, she asked him if he believed in God. And he said, some days I do. Depends on what day you ask me. And in his 2022 interview with Lawrence Krauss, he said, I'm mostly a materialist. And I think the mostly part, the part that's remaining, is just that personal connection with spirituality. And looking at how Cormac put his characters through kind of these transformational spiritual experiences like Suttree, I don't think he was any stranger to vertical thinking. But most people in reality are existing on the horizontal level. And when you view and see Judge Holden at a horizontal level, he is someone to look up to. We all don't feel autonomous in our own lives. You may have a wife or a husband that yells at you or doesn't believe in you. You have a job you don't like. Most people in America they're either single or don't like the person they are with. They for sure don't like their job. That's getting close to 80-90% of Americans or people in the West do not like their job. They wish they could do something more. Most of you guys aren't happy with your physical fitness. Wish you could be doing all these other habits and things. Wish you had more money. There are all these different things. And the reason you can't have it is most of the time you don't have the confidence to go and take it. You don't have the confidence to break up with your wife and quit the job. And I'm with you guys too. If I could probably quit my job right now and go full time with this, because right now I'm managing all this with a wife, family, working at my normal job 60 hours a week, doing daily meditation and workouts, and I'm somehow slipping and finding the time to do these videos. But I'm too scared. But what would personal development guru Judge Holden tell me? Well, he would tell me to go berserk and to just ditch it all. And that's why I think a lot of us view Judge Holden as this kind of prophet figure, because when people are existing out on the extremes, someone like Holden, who Holden wouldn't just accept you quitting your job and dealing with your wife yelling at you or doing these things. No, he wants you to go all out. And the problem with that is that that's just a covert way to stay in paralysis and never do anything. There will be occasionally someone who just, the straw will break the camel's back and they'll just go crazy and leave everything behind. But most people don't want to do that. And the practical way, the practical steps to you actually getting a better relationship, earning more money, having a more satisfying physical, mental, spiritual, and monetary life is through very boring people following, basic steps, making daily sacrifices over, the period of 5 to 10 years, and then you'll finally be able to pull yourself out of the hole that you've put yourself in. But Judge Holden, it's automatic. When we view him and we're visualizing him and understanding his presence, his reality, it's instant. There's no waiting. And this connects to this mythos and this idealization of the West that a lot of men mostly have. We look at this time and anything was possible. Most people today, if they even have a backyard, if not living in a townhouse or apartment, are living in this small little yard. But if you were here 200 years ago, you could stake a huge claim of land and live out on your own. You'd have to deal with the Indians and people like Holden and stuff. But the ability to engage in combat, to not have to be monogamous and be able to get with all these different types of women and to earn money and spend it the way that you want to. Those are all things that we strive for and actually biologically are somewhat programmed to have. Most men have never been punched in the face, or if they have, they're not, routinely engaging in combat or sparring or practicing in martial arts. They are locked down in vanilla monogamous relationships, and they got to put all their money in their 401k plan or all this other stuff. And so this grandiose philosophy of Judge Holden's is very appealable. But what Holden is rooted in is hyper rationality. And before I get too lost in the psychological breakdown of lit bros, let's look at some quotes from Holden and use that to kind of steer us back on track to talk about his philosophy and if we should take it seriously or not. And so here, quote, "It makes no difference what men think of war. War endures. As well, ask men what they think of stone. War always was here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." And a different quote relating to the same idea. "War is the truest form of divination, is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which because it binds them is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God." And for that last quote, if you don't really, I'm sure you guys know what he's talking about, but when I engage in combat with someone else, there are two wills going against each other. But when two bodies come together, it creates a larger will. And so the third will picks a winner. And that's why it's the ultimate game, because when you're warring with each other, then this third body, and we could call it God, gets to do this selection. And this is a somewhat spiritually infused Darwinism. And Holden's, main philosophy, or one of them, is that war is a priori. That instead of us living in a reality where the hermetic laws of existence, like polarity and gender and rhythm and stuff, are inherently part of the objective laws of the universe, war is that objective law. And what's hard with a lot of stuff that Holden says is that he's right. When we look back at human history and what was going on, there was no way to necessarily prevent. And, we could say in the last couple hundred years there were, but we fell into this violent conquest mindset that just seems that no matter where we were, it was the norm and we were built for it. I mean, sometimes monkeys or other animals go a bit crazy, polar bears, for instance, but as I've talked about in other videos, we killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century alone. I mean, we are really good at this. But one of the problems with Holden saying this is that he's not some unconscious brute. He is one of the more well-educated and well-spoken men in the whole area. Maybe in the whole state of Chihuahua or Sonora or the southern United States. He's one of the top dogs. And at that time, he obviously had read enough philosophy and understood enough that he could have chosen a different path. So we're dealing with this idea that Holden is choosing to take this Darwinistic philosophy. He's taking up the mantle with an absolute truth. And when you're dealing in absolutisms and making a priority objective claims in terms of morality and human existence, most of the time you're a rambler. And I know I do that sometimes, and I talk about objective morality on here. But I think the golden rule, the do no harm principle, even the self-defense principle have a lot more spiritual merit than the war is God. We have a violent nature by design argument is. I feel like just logically laying it out, humans have evolved to have language and be able to make our own choices and all this type of stuff. So we don't have to participate in wars of this manner. But Holden's argument starts off basically with saying that we're evolved from these monkeys or these violent animals, and he would even maybe argue that spirit there's this external force of war, this energy that's awaiting us, and then we just fill in the slot. But that humans, in our transition to being humans like this who are talking, we've never had the choice to be able to get rid of this warring gene within us. And I personally know that it's not that hard to get rid of that gene. It's really, and I can't really tell because it's so programmed into our society. There are so many different people who uphold this at just a very small level through just not just the abuse of their children, but just you got to defend yourself from the bullies and the public education system, throwing a bunch of kids together who's, some parents are on crack, other kids are like really nice and they all have to be together and there's bullying going on and there's this kind of perpetuating violent cycle from a very early age that isn't necessarily regulated in a healthy manner because I do believe that kids should be engaging in violence with each other, but in constrained environments like a boxing class or a jujitsu class or something. And I think that have done in that matter, you can easily gain control of that at an early age. And we haven't even gotten into like the mental or the physical aspects of being able to control it because I had to stop asking this question, but I used to ask people, how hard is it to go into the world and not want to just punch people in the face and just go berserk mode, go Vanderlei Silva mode and start knocking people out with hooks? And for me, it's not very hard. But other people are like, man, that's all I want to do. And axiomatically, as a society, most people are still existing in a very unconscious reactionary mindset where if you insult them or piss them off enough, they will engage in violence. But I will only engage in violence if it's out of self-defense, out of fear of me being hurt or someone that I love or an innocent around me being actually hurt. Not hurt through words, but through actual violence or the threat of violence. And as a teacher who engages with 14 and 15-year-olds every day who are livid in this mindset, I have students who would never engage in violence with any other person who just take it on the cheek and turn the other way. But I have other students, and I've witnessed fights in my classes almost every single year. The fights and behavior are getting worse. Let me tell you from the front line, even though technology and phones and red dye 40 and all these other things have been integrated into the modern consciousness of kids, and you may think that may make them more docile, it actually makes them more out of control. It actually means they can't control themselves. They have more impulsivity, and the actual neglect of the kids by the parents, because parents are now on the screens all the time and not actually engaging with kids in meaningful ways and taking them outside. It actually creates a lot of pent up energy. So things they're for sure not getting better. And as always in American history, most people, and especially as kids, are engaging in violence with each other and viewing this as the normal means of reality. And for you and I, who exist most of the time probably in a bubble, because my friends and who I'm with, we engage a lot of the time in practices of self-development and this and whatnot. And if someone was talking crap to us, we would just laugh and be like, all right, come on, dog. Like, what's wrong with you? Calm it down. But for the actual typical population, the normal everyday person who has never actually released any trauma or any emotion, they're going to explode. But whose fault is it? Is it our fault or is it society's fault that brought us into this? I was born into a Christian reality that's very close-minded to individuation, to anything that actually incites transformation, because the smallest inkling of transformation or feeling or connection with spirit creates the risk that you might start to question the GDP assembly line or religion in general. And there are 4 different aspects of control. There is mental control, physical control, emotional control, and one could say spiritual control. And all 4 of these are really the point of education, of being able to develop. And step 1 of being an educated person is engaging in the non-harm principle as best as you can. You could be this genius, one of the best philosophers in the world, but if you have a little man syndrome and are attacking people or get angry and have have never really touched your physical education or these things, you're not an integrated human being. Just as if you've not touched your feminine consciousness, if you're a man, if you've not integrated the anima and the animus, then you are a fragmented and broken human being. And I think that's where you start. I think that's step 1. Until you can educate yourself, at least in a small way, in all these different manners, and start to touch the other side of consciousness in terms of gender and the traits of the other side. If you're a man starting to tap into your emotions, and if you're a female starting to tap in the confidence and assertion and all these, typical things, then you're not really playing the game. You are still controlled by reality. You're still controlled by your own impulses. And in the Western world, we have no method for doing this. When you look at the East and you look at the chakra system or just spiritual systems in general, there is a systematic way that you need to progress into each level of consciousness. But the goal most of the time for a lot of the Abrahamic religions is not kind of the elevation of consciousness. It's procreate, prosper, and proselytize. And the individual mystical awakening of men or women in those religions is not actually the highest priority, because you actually can achieve a mystical Buddha type enlightenment within the realm of Christianity, and plenty of monks and people even like Jesus have done it before. But when we look at the highest degrees of success, if you're going to try to become a world champion in something, you're looking at one camp and they've produced like 3 world champions, and there's another that's produced 500. Which one are you going to go with if you get equal attention in each one? And that's how I view the East, and that's why I very much enjoy Eastern philosophy and study it, because they have a much higher degree of being able to create people who are nonviolent and have the ability to vertically think, to obtain mystical states in every single direction. But what's also interesting, to go even deeper now, is that most people in the world are actually NPCs, because Judge Holden has actually educated himself and is in control, because what he is preaching here is at the top of the mountain. So Holden is speaking down and rambling to these kind of dummies. When we look at the kid and we look at all these other people, they actually are not very smart. They're just kind of these men. But what has Holden done? He's mentally educated himself. He has mental control. He has spiritual control. He has a spiritual philosophy that he's controlling. He has emotional control. We don't see Holden exploding very much. We see him usually pretty constrained at times. He kind of, pops off a little bit, but I think that's just more the environment of in a place where you could be dying at every time. And then he obviously has a massive amount of physical control, and the spiritual control could also be connected to his supernaturalness. And so you can also awaken in either direction. You can awaken toward the light or toward love, or you can awaken toward darkness in terms of how you're going to control yourself and do these things and the code that you're going to follow. And so if you polarize toward hate and fear, you're just going to be constantly polarizing toward self-preservation, because in modern society, most people are a mishmash. Because they've never actually made this decision, don't know what's there, don't know the protocols to polarize in either direction. Sometimes they're pulled toward total self-preservation, and other times they're pulled toward this compassion. But when both are synergistically happening at once, it's not the middle path. You're not like the Buddha, not choosing the path of mercy or the path of severity, and you're taking the third way. That's not the third way. That's just actually staying at a standstill. And so one could actually see, and I could see the merit of Holden, is that he's actually calling for polarization. He's actually calling for us to make these radical choices, to move into extreme mindsets, which, in my opinion, is important in such a bland and vanilla world where it's very hard for us to actually individuate and expand out of these literally constrained environments. If you live in a suburban area or a city, everything has been mapped out for you since day one. I was born in Las Vegas, and the street signs, the customs, the codes, the education I was going to receive, the schools were already built. The teachers were already still teaching there 15 years before I was, going to attend those schools. But holding to these men, returning, and I'm sure you guys can understand. I don't need to go on a rant about how you can learn to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually control yourself, and there's different means and methods to be able to do that. But Holden here is a man who has this ability, and he's now on top of the mountain, and he's looking down at these people who have almost no ability to do this, and he's rambling to them. It's like me walking up, I have to control myself as a teacher. I teach 14 and 15-year-olds, and they aren't in the accelerated or the honors classes, and that's fine. And so what I have to hold myself back from doing is doing this. I can't go on these massive, crazy lectures with a ton of information, because they literally look at me and start looking, or they don't even look at me. They start looking at their phones or staring off into space. When I'm ranting, I can't even go over a minute. I have about 45 seconds to share a message, and then that's over. And that message better be simple and it better have steps. And that's why we go in steps. You do as a teacher, I teach a concept and then we do it over and over again in many different ways to seem like we're doing something different, but we're just practicing the same concept over and over again till they have mastery, and then we move forward. And if I went to the bar right now, it's 5:10 in the morning right now, but if I went to a bar that was still open and people were still drinking right now, and I started going off on Heidegger's relationship to Deleuze, and I was standing on the table and talking to them, maybe some people would be looking at me and be like, okay, cool. But no one's going to take me that seriously. If I go out and I decide, hey, I'm going to be a wildlife firefighter. I have a lot of buddies who used to do that. Know a lot of people. My sister did that for a season. And the people who go out there most of the time are the kids with too much energy, who need something to do. College isn't a good fit for them, and domestic life, but also working a crappy minimum wage job isn't either. So they see this as like a way to get out, to travel, to go do something fun and exploratory. But imagine going to one of these camps, being with all these dudes and going on these disquisitions. How do you think that's going to go? They're probably going to listen a little bit and roll their eyes at you, but they're going to respect you. They're going to look at you and be like, damn, this guy's pretty smart. This guy maybe got some messages. And if you keep it simple and maybe if you do it enough and you kind of align the philosophy to what they want to do, if you say war is God, fire is God, it was a pleasure to burn. If you get into all that, then they're maybe going to start to align with you and what you are trying to accomplish. But are you really a prophet or are you a rambling seducer? Because that's what I'm asking here as the question. Is Holden seducing the men and us, or is he actually someone that we should be taking seriously? And Holden is actually an advocate for polarization, and I want you guys to see this quote. The truth about the world, he said, is that anything is possible. Had you not seen it all from birth and thereby bled it of its strangeness, it would appear to you for what it is, a hat trick in a medicine show, a fever dream, a trance be populate with chimeras having neither analog nor precedent, an itinerant carnival, a migratory tent show whose ultimate destination, after many a pitch in many a muddled field, is unspeakable and calamitous beyond reckoning. And so this quote has almost everything we were just talking about in here. So first of all, he tells us anything is possible. That's the truth of the world. And it's not necessarily, and we'll break this down line by line, it's not necessarily, hey, you can do everything you want, but rather you can do anything. Anything is possible. Had you not seen it all from birth and thereby bled it of its strangeness? So if we weren't conditioned, as I was saying earlier, if we weren't conditioned to this reality, it would appear to you for what it is. A hat trick in a medicine show, a fever dream, a trance be populate, with chimeras, with NPCs, having neither analog nor precedent, people with no actual mechanisms of their own. These ghosts, these spectrals, these mud people who are not moving fast enough, who aren't really trying to move anywhere in reality. An itinerant carnival, so a carnival of people who are moving. He repeats the same word again, a migratory tent show, whose ultimate destination, so these NPC chimeras, their ultimate destination after many of a pitch, after many moons, in a muddled field of existence. So they're in this muddled field of reality. Where they're going is unspeakable and calamitous, which is very bad. It's very bad beyond reckoning. And so now we have to get a little bit, I have to admit a truth to you guys. That quote's the truth. That's everything I just told you guys. And Judge Holden right here is spewing occultism. He's telling us this path of polarization and that it exists, and that if you want to take that other path, you have to do it, because where's this place that they are going? Where do you guys think? Comment down below. Tell me, pause the video and tell me, what do you think he's saying about this unspeakable place? Where is that? And that unspeakable place, everyone, is leaving no energy signature on the world, because if you are just a reaction to your environment, if you are just sitting here as a passive, impulsive person who just is of their conditioning, you are not just on the wheel of karma. You're probably not even on it. You've left no presence on the world. You once again are leaving no energetic signature. You don't need to write a book. You don't need to do anything. All you need to do is make some unique choices and start to pull yourself out of your conditioning. Why do you guys think the entirety of Eastern philosophy is rambling on about that? Conditioning, that you have to get yourself out of this. You're never going to totally escape. You may, in these small moments of samadhi, be able to totally detach yourself from the body in meditation, or in these ecstatic moments. Guys like Ikkyu had, a famous Zen monk who's also a womanizer poet, a pretty good poet at that, nature poet. And he's got a great story. If you guys want to hear, one of the more wild writing stories about an author of all time, go check out his biography. So escape is never possible in totality, but we can leave a mark. And so the question is, do you want to leave a mark in terms of scientific materialism or through idealism, which is kind of, I would say, the opposite of materialism on the other end, if we're just talking in terms of Western philosophy here? Do you want to be of representation and be getting them and containing them and obsessing over them like Judge Holden? Or do you want to be grounded in the authentic? Do you want to take the path of this system of the chakras or go the inverse? And I can't tell you what to do, you guys. Like, I obviously want you to polarize toward the light. I think that's important, but that choice is the most important one that you'll ever make. And if you're an evil person, if you are sitting here on the fence and you aren't giving permission to yourself to go full evil, I'm giving you that permission right now. Even though I don't want that, even though we don't need that, in the long run, all the evil people in the world move and create energy to help all the people stuck in the middle make a choice toward a different side. They help awaken people up. The more people on either side in general, it is probably better in the long run because of the amount of people who are not engaging in any act of polarization. And I don't know if I like this interpretation. I don't know if this is the most truthful interpretation of this quote, but when we read the most famous quote of Blood Meridian, the one that's right behind me, his feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He's dancing. He says that he will never die. Just to do some, reaching literary theory here, if we just look at the whole presentation I went over, if you gain that unique energy signature, if you have the ability to do that on either side, you are never going to die. That is the key to immortality. And that's all I want for you guys, to be a player in the game with me, whether on my team or on the other team, and then we will go from there. But thank you guys for being here. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are on the video. I read all the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you are not. If you guys want to go on a Blood Meridian tour with me, I have a bunch of videos on the Cormac McCarthy course on Blood Meridian, touring some of the sites in Blood Meridian. There is a ton of other Cormac McCarthy content on there. I have Cormac McCarthy shirts for sale. The link is down in the description below. I started the video off with a Blood Meridian shirt, but I actually had to go do some food prep and get some stuff in the oven so I could have food at work for the rest of the day, and I spilled a bunch of food on it, so that's why I did the shirt change. So go check out some of those t-shirts. I have Instagram content on a lot of, honestly, Cormac McCarthy stuff. I post daily. I really need to start posting my poetry over there. That's like my main goal today. And so go check out my Instagram for content on Cormac, on my own writing. And thank you guys for being here. And I will see you guys in the next one.